Hello everybody and welcome to the channel's first ever monthly reading wrap-up, where we are going to be going through every book I read this month and giving my full fleshed out review. I do want to be fully transparent and say yes, this new series is being born out of necessity. Book reviews do not do consistently the best here on my channel, and I don't want to put out a ton of videos every month that have a chance of hurting me in the algorithm. But I refuse to let book reviews die. It is where my channel is born from, and it is what is most important to me in terms of content. Manga deep dives are probably my favorite to make, but this is where it feels like my soul resides as a YouTuber. That was overly dramatic. I want to make it completely clear, in no way, shape, or form are these going to be reduced reviews. As you can probably tell by the runtime, this is going to be a beefy video, and it's broken up by chapters, so you can just skip to the review you want to watch this month. Although, you might want to stick around for all of them, because we're doing something a little bit different here in terms of concept. Full transparency, which seems to be the theme of the channel this year, I usually just put down some bullet points for a review and then just ramble about my thoughts in the book, and that's the content you've gotten. For the first time ever, I am fully scripting each and every single one of these reviews. Yes, it may feel a little bit less conversational, but I'm hoping the end result will be much more articulate in terms of my thoughts on the content. And as a part of this, also, there is always going to be one book that my patrons vote on every month that I give my review on, and for this month, I read the first three master editions of Blame. So I won't be giving a full series review until obviously I finish the next three, I believe, but I am going to be getting into my thoughts here. And they also selected as a second place winner 1984, which I don't know if that was a meme pick or not, but I'm always happy to talk about a literary classic. Rereading that was really rewarding, actually. But nothing in terms of how we are stylistically approaching these new monthly wrap-ups is set in stone. I'm going to be looking in the comments for feedback from you all in terms of, no, you don't like the more scripted feel, or maybe add a conversational section and a scripted section, and maybe most importantly, feedback on the visuals, because I don't know if you want to see more of just my face or book covers, so we'll try our best there. But for now, let's go ahead and get into the book I had to say the most about this month, and that is going to be the return to the Night Angel trilogy from Brent Weeks, Night Angel Nemesis. Sorry to say this at the very start if you're watching this, Mr. Weeks, but I gotta say, getting back into the Night Angel series, I was a bit hesitant. I was afraid Mr. Weeks would fall back in some old writing habits to appeal to fans of the original series, and he did in some ways, but not the habits I was worried about. Of course, the big thing in the room is from Brent Weeks' own mouth, admittedly, which was very common, especially in the early 2000s for fantasy, the gaze on female characters in the Night Angel trilogy can be a bit, without any better way to put it, cringy. That aspect of the original Night Angel trilogy, well, for me, it absolutely is a point of criticism for the series. It didn't bother me as much as it seemed to a lot of people who read it today, especially because I understand in the early 2000s that was a lot more common, and the target demographic was the worst people on the planet, male teenagers. But it seems Mr. Weeks is well aware that you all have grown up in that time, and while sexuality is by no means completely absent from the series, it is definitely still there. It comes across much more maturely and even-handedly, and that theme of maturity is also carried over into Kylar's development. This is maybe the biggest positive of the book for me as a whole. I have never felt closer as a reader to Kylar. While the depth of Kylar has never been shallow per se, here we are placed so much deeper into his mind of how he thinks, how he works, that the growth Brent Weeks has gone through as a writer since publishing the original Night Angel trilogy just becomes overtly apparent. And generally, characterization shines through in this book as a whole. We have fun party dynamics that grow and evolve as the stakes rise in the narrative. Male and female characters are full of agency and making decisions constantly, really adding to a sense of urgency in my experience from early on in the book all the way to the conclusion. This might be the clippiest, epic book I have read so far this year, despite it being a thickum spanky boy. I think most people who pick up this book will get through it in a week. Conflict is also handled maybe the best of Weeks' career. Moral differences really drive characters believably into occasional clashes with each other that are always contained within believable shades of gray for a world where assassins are just a part of society. And as a final compliment to just the character work that happened here, well, I of course am a big fan of seeing Kylar mature and the handling of this character come across as more nuanced. The character that absolutely stole the show for me was Vi. Vi was often a victim of the earlier book's shortcomings in terms of characterization, and Weeks clearly wanted to make up for that here, but not in a way that comes across lazy or just fine, I'll shove in half-assed agency kind of way. Vi takes the wheel at times, and those might be my favorite parts of the book. In fact, Vi might be elevated to in my top 3 or 4 Brent Weeks characters. Finally, I think it was really smart to keep this world feeling slightly smaller than a lot of series are pushing themselves to be in this kind of renaissance for super duper epic fantasy we are experiencing right now. I won't say too much more due to spoiler concerns. This book isn't even out yet and won't be till April, but that dirty air that really permeated the original Night Angel trilogy is not lost. The world still feels kind of old and dreary, and it's the characterization that it provides a sense of hope, a light that the reader can hook onto and carry them through the narrative without just being overly bogged down and meh. It just has this wonderful back alley feel that, even with a slightly different narrative than we're used to, really lands. The action is Brent Weeks' action. It's where he's maybe improved the least, but it's where he needed to improve the least. The guy has always had a talent for really fun action set pieces, and of course, those are just realized here yet again. If you're a fan of Weeks, you'll probably love this book, and if not, this book clearly isn't even meant for you. It's the 4th in a series. I mean, come on. Though, if you've been on the edge about trying Night Angel, just know this ending is solid, especially on a character level. You might even have a little tear in your eye at some point. I do have to say though, as I originally said when I was reviewing the Night Angel trilogy, and still true to this day, assassin fantasy, unless it's written by Robin Hobb, is just not necessarily for me. Even with a heist angle to this story, which is kind of funnily just thrown into the blurb and marketing here, as it should be. That's a big selling pitch, and it's something I did like within the narrative. I just don't think Night Angel ever stood a chance of being in like my top 10 of all time. It's not built to be my taste. But damn, if Brent didn't come back and prove he's stronger than ever as an author and really understands what made his original series work, and is able to just enhance that experience with what he's learned since then. It's really cool to see someone be able to crack back open a world and add something that doesn't feel forced and like it just naturally grew from the previous narrative. Overall, I'm feeling a 7.5 out of 10. Really solid overall, just not my personal taste in several ways. Oh, and I prefer personally when Brent Weeks writes in third person. That's all I'll say there. Now, I know some people have been really looking forward to me getting into the Dandelion Dynasty. I will say that I feel this series, because I read all 3 books this month, deserves a video of its own. So I'm actually going to be planning in April to be doing a series deep dive similar to many of my older videos for the Dandelion Dynasty, starting with the Grace of Kings, obviously. So if you'd like to read this series with me between now and then, I recommend you check it on out. But for now, I will just say that yes, this made a large enough impact on me that I do want to do a dedicated video on it, despite how that may or may not perform in the algorithm. I don't care. I just want to talk about the Grace of Kings. Okay, but now we need to get into Blame, which I read the first 3 master editions of, and what the fuck? I am 3 mega super deluxe ultra whatever you call them editions into Blame, and I am confused, a bit scared, mildly aroused, and I don't like the fact that I'm feeling any of those, but I am also hyper fascinated. What I can say confidently about this narrative so far is that we are following a man named Kiri as he is climbing higher and higher within a mega structure, which is also something I put in my cyberpunk book before I even read this. That was kind of cool for me. How long has he been climbing for? How dare you ask that question? But he is encountering the most fascinatingly designed murder machines I've possibly ever seen. In the first book, he commits a terrorist act for a good cause, I think. Man, this just feels like the first advanced manga I've ever read, and I'm so here for it. I don't know and doubt this will end up being in my all-time favorites, but I love the experience of this story so far. Where previous mangas I've read have always tried to communicate with the reader in a very direct way, this feels like it's not treating me like I'm an intelligent reader, like any good fiction does, where it doesn't over-explain things, but instead it's asking me to sniff through the smallest details for context to build a world I want to know so much more about. Like, I understand the workers were saying that like this person was set up to be the bad guy exploiting them, but what then happens is so just okay. When it comes to my criticisms, this art can leave something to be desired if you're looking for every panel to strike you as a masterpiece like some manga do. Seriously, sometimes it feels like the author just did a storyboard sketch for a panel then f***ed off. But I'm end up left thinking maybe that's a part of the environment or the atmosphere and the appeal. It certainly does enhance the feeling of sterile micropsia Blame just in inflicts on you. And the best argument for it being intentional is whenever Nihi, which I hope that's the author's pronunciation, wants to show off their abilities as an artist. God damn! Look at this! What is it? I still don't entirely know, and it's awesome. The body horror and creature design, when it's at its best within Blame, can throw punches with even, sorry for the reference to something I frequently talk about, but some of the best art of Berserk. I'm not done with the narrative, obviously, and occasionally there's been these exposition dumps that have certainly recontextualized and maybe understand certain things that have happened before, but before I give a full confident review on Blame, I want to get all the way through it and then reread it so I hopefully at that point will understand all these little just constant action sequences that are happening. Right now, I could feel this going either way for me. It could end up being something that I think is genius at the end or just kind of falling off. And I'm still wary of promising starts relying on interesting premises for manga due to Death Note's horrible fall off, but maybe Blame has the potential to correct course for that for me, and I'm excited to find out. I do wish I had gotten through all of it for y'all, but I just, for something I misread online, thought it was just 3 deluxe editions, which confused me a little bit until I realized, no, it is 6. But don't worry, we'll get there soon. And then also winning the Patreon poll, or coming in second place, we had 1984. I'm not sure if this one is a meme, but hey, either way, I'm happy to reread a classic. Maybe I want to approach this in a slightly different way though, because this book is the book people point to when they say it's more relevant now than when it was first written. First of all, no, 1984 is not more relevant now than in the wake of World War II, you dolt. Authoritarianism is something we are going to be struggling with as long as there are politicians who want more personal wealth and power. So until a heat death of the universe. But I think the fact that people across the US political spectrum reach to this book and attempt to condemn the other speaks to George Orwell's ability with concept here. Even if a book is fundamentally attacking your views, if it makes those arguments well and tells a good story, if you're smart and secure enough in yourself to maybe reevaluate your views or realize the flaws in the argument it's putting forth, this book could still end up among some of your favorites of all time, and it maybe should. If you're stupid, you'll just claim this book somehow tried to preach your modern day party's values, even though it wasn't written to focus on the ideas or circumstances we are living in nearly a century after its publication. For the love of God, context matters. George Orwell is a complicated man, and it seemed his values and beliefs evolved throughout his life, because you know, he was a human being. That being said, yes, there are absolutely things within this book applicable to any era in American history, and it's important to do that when it's appropriate, but to do it carefully, and remember this is just a piece of fiction. Now, the book itself is incredible. Big Brother should be counted as one of the greatest villains in fiction, and that's what I want to talk about today. While many different government officials represent Big Brother throughout the story, it is one antagonist, one system churning its way through society, bending people's free will until it breaks, and the masses are left no option but to swallow Big Brother's propaganda and wait for the inevitable bloody collapse systems like this always result in. The government's dependence on war, the protagonist's tiny to large acts of rebellion, and the heart-destroying ending of this story all hold up the same as they always have. Thematically perfect. This is a classic and still a 10 out of 10 today, and might be one of my favorite novels of all time. I will actually say the one thing I think is more interesting about this book than ever in one specific way is just how many technological predictions about the future it got kind of in the ballpark of right in terms of displays and things along those lines, which I guess you can say the discussion around George Orwell's predictions for the future in terms of tech and the, Orwellian surveillance that we've come to know and love from our corporate overlords is more relevant than ever. So you have that. Orwell's prose were way ahead of their time, and certainly something that could still be learned from today. The characterization is minimal in some ways, but poignant to the overall theme, which so much of this book is just bent towards serving to magnificent effect. But maybe most impressive of all, and why people from across the political spectrum grasp at this book to try and prove a point when they don't know how to debate for themselves and their own ideas, is that the underlying concepts and political ideology within 1984 of anti-authoritarianism is splendid. It is rock solid. Yes, it is taken to a near cartoonish extreme, but there's a part of your brain that looks at the reality that is created through the world building and recognizes that, well, reality is kind of cartoonish and stupid. So it remains dangerous and poignant feeling. It's like he brought everything to the exact right extreme to just be on the edge of believability. If you have not read let's be honest, you've read 1984. Let's get to the next review. And here is going to be my briefest of all because I just don't have that much to say. And it's going to be the
Eissenhorn
Trilogy for the Warhammer 40k universe. This overstayed its welcome, and I'm sorry to say it, I did enjoy the first book for being action-packed, bombastic, and introducing me to a world that I was so impressed by. And the second and third books, the one thing that really drove me through to the end there was kind of exploring the Warhammer 40k universe as a whole. It's a really big draw, and I understand how you could just get lost in there with your imagination forever, which it seems many people have with how gargantuan the Warhammer 40k universe still proves to be today. I mean, how big it is in terms of sales, but I also guess that could apply to just size. But the cancer to my overall enjoyment for the
Eissenhorn
Trilogy comes with the big old CT. Character and tone. Aside from the titular Eissenhorn, I didn't find myself particularly attached to anyone throughout this narrative, already just a few weeks after finishing the 3 books, suffering from massive brain fog for me. I just can't pick out particular details, aside from just a blur of action sequences that after so many repeated times began to all feel like one continuous fight. And it was at its best written interestingly enough to be like solid action, but there's a reason that the raid has a pretty slim runtime. And if there's such a strong part of your book that makes so much noise, for me personally, it ends up overwhelming almost any other element I try to grab onto because it feels like it's what the book itself is telling me is the priority and what I should focus on. It didn't really do anything intelligent with its observations on the wider themes that are set up to exist within the Warhammer world. For the first book, I'm still pretty positive. I definitely thought it had its charm with just how wild it came across, but as a whole, the sum is weaker than its parts, unlike How to Train Your Dragon, which I just said the opposite for of, and the experience just ended up going down quite rough for me by the end when it was just so far past overstaying its welcome. So for me, this is going to be going down to a 4.5 out of 10, which is somehow not the worst read this month, which I am shocked to say, because we also need to talk about The Passenger. But I want to start this off by saying that this is a very different type of negative review, because I am fully willing to admit Cormac McCarthy is a master of their craft, one of the greatest authors still drawing breath on Earth today. The Road is still the book I will point to as drawing the most visceral emotional response from me I have ever had. Wasn't a very broad emotional response, just discussed sadness, anger, and depression, but it drew a lot. The Passenger, though, feels like a really neat experiment, but its end execution just falls very flat. For some people of a very specific taste, this might be the most brilliant thing you've ever read because it is absolutely trying to appeal to a specific taste. But I'm reminded of the movie Crimes of the Future, not because of the over-the-top violence. In fact, McCarthy's signature brutal style writing is substantially reduced here, and what we are left with is something revolving around more interesting writing and narrative concepts instead of delivering something cathartic. And just like there are people who thought Crimes of the Future was an incredibly brave and interesting movie and they hold it up as like a pillar of horror, there are going to be readers who read Passengers and just somehow vibe with an incredibly specific and contained vibe. But for those of us who are not able to tap into that hyper-specific vein you need to mine heavily for to reach, is something that just fails to be gripping on any form of narrative level beyond just, we're being interesting. The greatest feeling left here is frustration. The Passenger failed to create anything vivid or passionate enough for me, which for this type of storytelling is the appeal, for it to actually put a single hook in me as a reader. Unfortunately, just a giant miss. It's an attempt at something new and is technically well done. And I will put a note on here that this is the book I am most likely to reread this year, for sure, because I also want to read the sister novel, Stella Maris, I believe it's called, which maybe could recontextualize a lot here and make it start clicking. But for now, it's going to sit at a 4 out of 10. But this is just my first batch review ever here on the channel. I even got to include books that I might not have had enough to say about in a normal review to even justify making a video for, so that's fun. And let me know what you think of this in the comments down below. Do you enjoy this format? Do you think I should tweak it a little bit? Let me know how. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Check out my books, my Patreon if you want to vote on future reads, and have a good one, y'all. Peace.